My whole life, I've taken care of women. I've seen women have let me into their life at unspeakable sorrow, incredible joy, and make me be a better midwife, a better person. And I thought, is this so lucky I am that something in that book could touch her and make her feel better. So thank you so much. It's such an honor, and thank you, Zoe, for having me in Norwell Public Library. I actually lived in Norwell when this library was being built, and it is just the staff and the library just magnificent. So such an honor to be here. I thought, as you all know, I am a nurse midwife, so I thought I would start with a little history of American nurse midwifery, because I'd like you to know about it. Talk about why I wanted to write the series, how I got published, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the books, and of course, any questions. So there's always been midwives, as everybody knows, granny midwives who weren't nurses, weren't midwives, but provided great care to women throughout the centuries. But American nurse midwifery started in 1925. Very interesting story. A woman named Mary Breckenridge, who in her first marriage, I think, she lost a child at a few years of age. Second marriage, and she was a woman of means, lost a child a few days after birth. And she did a lot of research and really felt that midwives could decrease maternal mortality. So first she became a nurse, helped in the flu epidemic in New York City in 1918, and then she went to the UK to become a midwife. And while she was there, she went to the Scottish Highlands with the midwives, learned how to ride horseback, was very interested in providing rural care. And she had this idea to come back to the United States, and she picked a place with very high maternal mortality and neonatal mortality statistics, Appalachia, Hayden, Kentucky. And she recruited a band of midwives, young midwives from the UK, to come with her. And it's not in the OCLN system, but there's a great movie, if anyone's interested, called Angels on Horseback, Midwives in the Mountains, and it shows actual footage of them going from hollow to hollow, delivering babies, giving primary care. And at the end of a year, it was a dramatic decrease in the maternal mortality rate. And they have a great history. They're still there, called the Frontier Nursing Service. And through the Depression, she actually worked very hard fundraising to make sure that that service would stay in practice. Now, the women who taught, I became a midwife in the 70s. The women who taught me were all, if any of you watch Called Midwife, those were the midwives who taught. I was in the United States, but they were all either British trained or British midwives. And they're exactly as you see. They're calm, they're compassionate, they're experts in the birth process. And unlike American TV shows where if there's an emergency, there's slamming and yelling, I was with them through many of emergencies, never a raised voice. They just felt like you know what to do, you know who to call, and you carry on. Now, saying that, before you ever touched a patient, you practiced doing birth on mannequins, you practiced suturing on foam rubber for weeks and weeks, and then every exam was essay 100%, and you had to get 100% or you rewrote it. Because their philosophy was, why would you ever touch a woman if you didn't know 100% what you were doing? So they were just incredible teachers, wonderful women. Currently, there's 14,000 nurse midwives in the United States. In Massachusetts today, about 18% of the births are attended by midwives. In the United States, about 10%. So become a nurse midwife in the United States, you have to be an RN with a bachelor's degree, then usually a few years experience, and then you do a midwifery program, 1 to 2 years. And when you graduate, you can take a national exam, and then if you pass, use the initial CNM, which is Certified Nurse Midwife, after your name. Now, I always worked in tertiary hospitals, Mass General, Brigham, University of Southern California. I never did home birth. So my midwife in the books is a nurse midwife who works in a tertiary center, because that's what I know. The reason I decided that I wanted to write these was I felt, even today, a lot of people didn't know what nurse midwives do. And this is going to sound kind of crazy, but or even nurses. I felt that nurses were always portrayed in TV or often in books as handmaidens of the physician, tight uniforms, big breasts, and the physician always sort of stole the show. And I don't know if any of you are probably way too young to remember, but there was a series of books called Cherry Ames, and they were started in the 1940s to Cherry Ames.
Cherry
Cherry Ames. And it's Cherry Ames ski nurse, army nurse, camp nurse. It was started to have American young girls be interested in nursing so they would help the war effort. They became so popular that they lasted through the 70s. And I grew up reading these books, and Cherry Ames was bright, and she always solved the case, and it was really a wonderful, I mean, it's in the times when you read it, it's 50s and 60s, but she was really a great heroine, and she was a nurse. So I remember in the 80s, there was this op-ed, which I still have. It's kind of funny. It came out in the American Journal of Nursing, and it said, "Who will update Cherry Ames?" And I remember I read that op-ed, and I thought, well, I want it to be me, which was totally crazy at the time, because I wrote textbooks, midwifery textbooks, but I didn't write fiction. But I remember thinking, and I just kept it all those years, because I thought, well, I want to be the one, which was kind of a dream. But anyway, so I had this dream, and I really wanted to put a nurse midwife, and I loved mysteries, loved Agatha Christie. Actually, when I started my midwifery program, I sort of found Agatha Christie at the same time. So I just kind of wanted to combine them. So I had this idea, and I started going to writing conferences. And, you know, I was writing, and, you know, you go to writing conferences, and I mean, some of them were wonderful. And I did get, you know, you could pass in first page, first chapter, and you would get, usually I got good feedback. But I'm going to tell you about one story, and I tell this at every talk, because if any of you are aspiring writers, and I've heard this from so many other writers, I was at a round table, and there were 12 of us, and it was a first page read. And I will tell you, my first sentence and my first page in my first book is still that first page. But there was an agent at the table, and I don't know why I started first. I guess I was just unlucky. But I was halfway through, and she stopped and said, no, you are a nonfiction writer. No one wants to read about birth. No one wants to read this in a fiction. So I think you should stay with textbooks. And I remember I was like, okay. And of course, then I had to listen to her tell everyone else how wonderful they were. But I got in my car, and I drove home, and I thought, well, she's wrong, because it's what I would like to read. So I'm going to keep on. And I can't tell you how many other writers tell me a very similar story. And I will just tell you that 3 years later, I was invited as a debut author to her conference, and then 4 years later, I was on a panel. So she was, I mean, I'm not saying my book is great, but it's just like the author I was sitting with outside while we were waiting for our debut novel, when she walked by, he kind of went like this, and he's become my friend. And I said, Jim, what's wrong? And he said, oh, she really discouraged me. I said, me too. So anyway, my thing is, you just have to kind of believe in what you think is right. But I finally, after all those conferences, I decided I needed an editor. And because I just didn't know. I had a manuscript, but I knew it wasn't quite right. So it was COVID. I looked online, and there's big organizations you could go through, like Readsy. You send in a chapter or two, and people would write back and say to me, oh yes, I can work with you, but I never felt connected. So I did a big online search and found a one-woman shop in San Francisco, and we Zoomed, and she said, send me a few chapters, and then she said, yes, I can work with you. And I will tell you what happened, but she's unbelievable. She's been with me through all 5 books. She does a developmental edit and an edit. Before my publisher ever gets it, I call her my book midwife. And she's been great. So I sent it all off to her, and I was working at the time. And I came home, you know, every day so excited. What's she gonna, you know, nothing. 3 weeks later, I got a 15-page paper, editorial letter. The first 3 pages were, I love your plot, I love your settings, I love your character. Now, take out all the backstory, take out all these characters, take out all these other things, save them because you'll use them in another book, which I thought was ridiculous, and I did. And then she said, you need to learn how people talk in dialogue in a book. So read these 10 books, and then revise this entire manuscript and blow it up. And I walk a lot, as some people here know, and I would walk around thinking, well, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to be an author, and just give it up. And then finally, after about 2 weeks, I thought, well, okay, if this is really what you want, then blow the entire thing up, read all the books. And so I did, and I revised the entire thing, looked at everything she said, sent it back to her, and she said, okay, this is what I thought it could be. And of course, she still had a few more edits. And then about a month later, she said, it's time to find an agent. And I was very reluctant. Now, self-publishing is wonderful, and people do great with it. For me, I needed the validation that someone else thought my work was okay to be published. Just old school, that's how I am. So I was very reluctant, and she said, why? And I said, because I'm afraid of rejection. And she said to me, you're a midwife, you're used to rejection, get over yourself. She's sort of my little coach too. So I sent it out, and looking for an agent is like a full-time job. There's a place online called Query Tracker, and you put in your genre, and then you find out who's open for submissions. Some of them want 50 pages, 1 chapter, 3 chapters, 10 chapters, 100 pages. Some want practically your life story. Some want a little file filled out. So it really takes a long time. I sent it out to 70 agents, and when I thought that was a lot, when I was on a panel with, at a conference, the woman beside me said, oh, I sent it out to 150. So it takes a lot. I got a few rejections right away, which actually was good, like midwives are not for me, which is good. At least fine. Some I still never heard from. Got a lot of other rejections, and then one day, probably a month in, this woman called me on the phone and said, I'd like to see 4 chapters. I'm an agent. So I sent her 4 chapters, and then a week later she said, I want to sign you to my agency, and fine. And I met her about a year later in Maryland at a convention. And if you can imagine, this is a big mystery convention. Most of the agents are very, even the men, well-dressed and, hair done, and you could tell right away that they're not the writers, they're the agents. When I met Dawn, she had on, I'm sure they were Walmart jeans. All her t-shirts would say like Larry's Bar and Grill. She got them free. She definitely cut her own hair. She wore no makeup. And she said to me, and she was the largest selling cozy author in the United States. She said, I fly under the radar, and people just don't think that I'm an agent, and they kind of overlook me. And she did, I will tell you what happened to her, but anyway, she's wonderful, and had 200 of us authors in her agency. And you would think she only had 1. That's how wonderful she was. And she said to me, the reason I signed you was I never heard of a modern midwife. I heard of Amish, I heard of historical, but I never heard of a modern midwife in fiction. So she edited the book, small edits, but she edited. And then she said to me, to me was the benefit of having an agent. I think the book was done in October. And she said, we're not sending it out till January because it's the holidays. And we're not sending it out the beginning of January, she said, because they'll be swamped with emails. We're going to wait till the middle. And she knew what books were coming. She really had her finger on everything. And she sent it out mid-January to 5 publishers. And I'm not talking Simon & Schuster, I'm talking small presses. And I had 3 offers within like 6 days. And I said, and some of you will appreciate this, I said, are they all equal? And she said, yes. And I said, well, I have one question. And she said, she's very funny. She said, what? And I said, Dawn, I'm not a spring chicken. And I have heard at conferences that people wait 10 years to have their books published. I don't want that to be me. I don't want it to be, oh, gee, isn't that nice, Chris wrote a book. Sad she's no longer here, but she wrote a book. So she said, well, I'm going to tell you who will do it. And she gave me this woman, and I signed with her, Gemma Halliday Publishing in California, who has been wonderful to me. Of course, then Gemma got the book and edited the book. And her editor, she was a doula. And if any of you know a doula, it's a woman who, not a nurse, not a midwife, but stays with the woman during labor. But she was very active. She only did home births. Now, I only did tertiary hospital births, but I had worked in California, was very familiar with the home birth movement there. So she and I went back and forth about a few philosophical issues. Like one thing I always tell, because it's kind of funny, in the book, of course, the midwife has a life, and sometimes she would leave a patient. And she would say to me, I don't understand, Chris, why is this midwife not staying? I said, okay, you maybe have 3 patients a month. This practice has maybe 40, and a woman, she has a life. She has to, it's like a nurse. You have to leave at a certain time. You don't stay like, for the end of time. So we finally got through some of that. And then the legal department got a hold of it. And, in all my books, I put an epigraph in every chapter, because I often felt as a practicing midwife, sometimes in medicine, we throw terms around and we don't really explain to women what they mean. And, I wanted to just demystify some things or clarify. So I'll give you the first one. The first trimester of pregnancy begins on the first day of the last menstrual period and lasts till the end of week 12. And I have those throughout the book. Well, I had written one of them that said folic acid can decrease neural tube defects. And the legal team went crazy. And they said, well, you can't say that. I said, well, it's true. They said, but no, you don't know how much a person might take, and we don't want you to say you're an authority. So a few of those things had to be changed. And then she changed my title. She wanted them all to be murder, so which was fine. And the cover art, I'll tell you a cute story. I think my covers are beautiful. Everything I would tell her exactly what I wanted, and I had final decision. It was great. On this one, Murder on the Widow's Walk, I asked for a New England mansion on the water. And now, when you have an agent, like I had no contact with the agent, with the publisher. Everything goes through your agent. But it would come back and I'd say, no, it's not right. It looks like an Italian villa. So the second time, and of course this is costing the publisher money, she said, I'm going to put you directly in contact with the artist who lived in Naples, Italy, who had never seen a New England mansion. But I think she did a magnificent job when she saw it. And she does. She's done all my covers, and she does a great work. Let's see, my first book came out in 2022, so it was very timely. It came out in 2022. I was still working at Mass General. The midwives and nurses and physicians, they were wonderful. They promoted it all over social media. It was really thrilling to have my first book out. And I got an email from a woman in Germany, just kind of interesting tidbits I thought I would share, who told me, and through the books there's a lot of OBGYN vignettes, like a lot of, she's a practicing midwife and her patients have certain things happen. And this woman from Germany wrote to me and said, one of the stories in your book, actually, that was my pregnancy. And she said it was very difficult. She said, I never felt seen. I never felt I understood what happened, and now I do. And now I understand what my caretakers were feeling when they took care of me. And it really sort of gave me chills. It's like my whole life I've taken care of women. I've seen women have let me into their life at unspeakable sorrow, incredible joy, and make me be a better midwife, a better person. And I thought, is this so lucky I am that something in that book could touch her and make her feel better. It's like a little tiny bit I could pay back. So that was really wonderful. Another woman wrote to me and said, if any of you are nurses or were nurses, said, I never realized that nurses went from a tragic situation to a happy situation in minutes. And it really made me think about it. It's how we compartmentalize in medicine. You go from something really, like a woman having her fifth miscarriage, to, oops, here's the woman and her husband, celebrating that they're pregnant, and you just switch on and switch off. And we do that all the time. Some things I did learn. Small publishers do not do a lot of promotion. She does some, my publisher, but I'm expected to have a website, which is thoughtfulmidwife.com. If any of you want to sign up, I send out a newsletter. If you ever saw me with the Wix guy on the other end of the phone, he probably was ready to kill himself, trying to set this up, because it's it took me a lot of time to understand it. I had to be on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which is now X, Blue Sky. You really have to do a lot of your own promotion. And one thing I did learn is that reviews incredibly count, especially Amazon reviews. It's how writers get their next contract. And I'll tell you about Tanto Media. I'll tell you now, Tanto Media picked up my first 3 books, and they're on audiobook. My 4th book, they wrote and said to my publisher that they're waiting to see what the reviews on Amazon are like, and then they'll decide if they're going to do that one. Which, of course, is something, she told me that's just something that happens. The other thing, I joined I remember I moved and I saw this ad for a writing group starting. And it's funny, when you work in a big tertiary center, I probably talk to 200 people a day between patients, etc. Then when you start writing, it's so solitary, it's like 10 hours a day and you don't really speak to anyone. Plus I type with one finger, so you can imagine how slow I am. And I saw this thing, writing group. So I thought, and very introverted that I think a lot of writers are, I thought I'll go to one meeting and I'll never go back. Well, we're coming up to 2 years. I have to say they are the most gracious, kind people. Some write historical fiction, a thriller, a poetry magazine, an arts magazine. They're just a very kind group and very supportive, which is something, I didn't even know that you could have that doing this. Let's see, I have 4 books out. Norwell Library has all of them. They're also, the bookstores around here have been great. Barnes & Noble, Hingham, Buttonwoods and Cohasset, Book Love in Plymouth, Booked. The other thing that, wonderful thing that happened was I have worked for years, like Zoe said, for Talking Information Center, where we read everything to the visually and the print impaired. We read grocery lists, we read every paper you can imagine, books, magazines, and they've allowed me to read all of the books for the listeners. And the listeners have, because they know my voice from so many years, and so they've been very wonderful to me that those are out. I thought I'd show you the books. Murder at the Wedding is the first book, and all of them have recipes. That cake is from this book. Maeve is my midwife. Her sister Meg is a high-end realtor, and she has a Boston Irish mother. The chief obstetrician has his daughter, only daughter, has a very lavish wedding. Maeve's husband caters the wedding, and the chief obstetrician dies at the wedding. So, and a family friend is arrested. So that's how she begins, and begins to become an amateur sleuth. And in this book, she's also having fertility issues, and she also can't bake. And one day, she's just so upset about she can't get pregnant and she can't bake, and she says to her husband, who's a chef, well, how can I even be a mother, because I can't even make a cookie? And, and he says, you can buy store-bought cookies. You don't have to be a baker to be a mom. But she researches and finds this cake, the Maeve's triple fudge cake, which of course comes out perfect, because if you see the recipe, it's all in one bowl. It's a cake mix. It never, trust me, I've made it 100 times. It never fails. And so then she feels so much better. Murder on the Widow's Walk. She's also a rower. Murder on the Widow's Walk. A takeover king is coming to town, and he buys a big New England mansion off her sister, is the realtor, and one day they find him either pushed or somebody killed him off the Widow's Walk, and her young pregnant patient is arrested. So that's how she gets involved. And this is a lot of rowing in this book. In Murder on the Books, I hate to say this with Zoe here, but the well-loved librarian director gets murdered. There's only so many people in a small town, okay? The well-loved librarian director gets murdered, and Maeve's in the middle of motherhood journey, and also at her mother's senior center. And the mother is wonderful, the Boston Irish mother. There's robberies going on, and there's 4 of them. They call themselves the Ladies of the Lobby, her mother and her 3 friends, who really help in solving this mystery. And then Murder at First Light, she's actually rowing by a lighthouse and sees somebody come down and pass out, and he's getting CPR. It turns out, in fact, it wasn't a cardiac event. He was murdered. So she really gets involved in this group in the town called, as I call them, the Yummy Mummies, very wealthy, who hire nannies, but not Irish nannies. And so she has to finally find out what happened. So I thought I would just read you a little tiny bit of the first one. And another wonderful thing that happened is my publisher. So I have a publisher, and then she has it. Oh, so my agent, I'll tell you about my agent first. Sorry to skip around. My agent, who was absolutely wonderful and treated all of us like we were the only person, just suddenly died. And she had no succession plan set up, which she had 2 agents who worked for her, but neither one felt that they could take on, the agency was huge. So another agent who had sold my audio rights called me and said that she would like to represent me, not for these books, but if I do anything further. So for the last 2 books, I signed with the publisher alone. She sent me a contract, which is a very different experience, I have to say. The agent kind of sort of, takes your hand, and she clears up everything. When you do it the publisher direct, she's wonderful, but you're one of many people that she's with, and she gives you about a minute, and so any issues that come up, it's a very different way to deal. But and so she did call me and tell me that Harlequin Worldwide Mysteries picked up my first 2 books. They'll mass market them. They will come out on their site. It's a smaller version. The book is the same, but the cover is different. And so that's incredible. Harlequin's a big publisher. I was telling my writing group the other night, my publisher, who's small, I get 1 free copy. I can buy them at cost, but they don't count in book sales, and they don't count at royalties. The other day, a carton of the Harlequin books showed up, And I said, big publisher, small publisher. But not that I have anything really to do with them, but it was just kind of funny. So I just thought I'd read you this is when she first comes to Creighton, and this just gives you a little glimpse of the hospital and the town. As I sat in my Jeep, I thought back to my job interview 5 years ago. Arriving at Creighton Memorial, the long row of imposing red brick buildings and immaculate lawns made me believe I had come across one of the many college campuses scattered across Massachusetts. Doctors in training at different Boston medical centers routinely rotated through the various services to get a feel for private practice. And while the excellent care contributed to the hospital's reputation, it didn't hurt that the grounds and facilities endowed to the hilt by the town's wealthier citizens could only be described as magnificent. Walking into the main building, I nodded at the two blue-haired and deeply tanned older women sitting at the information desk. The foyer had marble fireplaces, tasteful reproduction furniture, and antique quilts on the walls. Call it Ralph Lauren's Country Hospital. Dr. Whitaker had been the chief of obstetrics for 30 years. After gawking at the opulent lobby, I'd been directed to his suite and found myself in a waiting room paneled in rich, dark mahogany and furnished with maroon leather club chairs. On the walls hung scenes of naval battles and hunting dogs. It was pitch-perfect old boy decor. So that's her first time when she sees, it changes throughout the book, but she meets the head of Creighton Memorial. So I guess my message is when I ever talk to people, I know that some people are aspiring writers. I mean, when you think about how improbable it was that I got an agent, got published, especially as an older first-time debut author. So if any of you are writing, I always tell everybody, it only takes one person to believe in you, just one person to think that what you have to say is value. So I always just say, and keep it up. My son was a heavyweight rower in college, and then he, even though he does something else for work, he also, on the West Coast, coached high school kids. And I think I've been to regattas from coast to coast. I think for the head of the Childs, I've had more kids in my house than I have rooms for, and have fed them. But I just really liked rowing a lot. And it kind of went with New England, and, wanted her to have, I wanted her to have a different activity. And she's 6 feet tall. So I wanted to have something different. Because, just saying, being 6 feet tall, just saying, there's not a lot of stories about women that tall. And I just really, I wanted just to sort of put that in there. Because I think sometimes, I think in one thing I wrote that she's trying to talk to a patient and she sits down. And when you're this tall and it's somebody who's in pain or something, height sometimes can make a patient especially feel, a little maybe nervous to talk. So I always would bring myself down to the patient. And I think that's just some things I wanted to include. I am Irish, and the whole, really the book, throughout the theme of the book is a lot of Irish. They talk a lot about, they're a big Irish family. And the mother also is Boston Irish, and they talk a lot about different things. And the mother's dream has always been, the mother's disabled, but her dream has always been to go to Ireland. And so I always knew in my head that's where it was, I hoped I got a contract for 5, because that's where it was going to end, was going to be they went to Ireland. And, there's just, there's just a lot of things, I think even me growing up about, there's a lot in that book about, the first son in rural Ireland. The first son was the one who inherited the farm. So if you were a second or a third son, you either came to the United States or you did something else, because that was not going to happen for you. And so I wanted to incorporate that into the book. My first book, I just started writing, and I just thought it would come to me. Well, I told you what the revision I had to do, but I tried to outline. I wish I was a better outliner. I mean, outlining is so valuable, and I am terrible, because I will do it and just write a few little things. And I've asked my editor, the one in California that I use, and she said, some people do do an outline exactly what they're going to do, and some people don't. So I'm sort of half and half. I always know sort of where it's going, but then, it's so funny, and I never thought this would happen. A couple times when I'm in the middle of writing it, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll go, Meg would never say that. She would never do that. And, all of a sudden I realized, no, I'm going in the wrong direction. So I outline, but then I kind of leave it a little. This is going to be the end of the series. I decided, yeah. But I used every single thing she told me to save, which I thought was crazy, I used in the other books. I'm starting another series. I'm outlining. I'm starting another series, and it's going to be in New England, because I don't know, I just love writing about New England. It's going to be in a New England town. The person who is really the main person is a nurse. Not surprising. She's an emergency room nurse, but she lives with her sister and some other people because of her situation. It's funny, there were times in the early, as a midwife in the 70s, there were times when people thought about changing the name midwife because they felt that people wouldn't really sort of understand what midwives do. So there was a lot of back and forth, but then everybody, we decided to stay with the name midwife, which means with woman, which is what we do. But there was some controversy way back about should we stay with that or should we change. I loved what I did for so long. It was such a privilege to take care of women. I mean, it's funny. I never have told the story before, but this is so true. For a short minute, I worked at a place where there was a physician's assistant, a woman, and she had graduated and had taken that position right away and was really physician trained. And nothing against physicians, but she was very, she saw a lot of patients, and I at that point had probably been a midwife about, it was probably 25 years or 30 years, and she said to me at the end of the night, because we worked 3 to 11, she said, "Chris, why are you always so happy?" And well, then I found out she didn't really speak to them. She was like very to the patients, here's what you're here for, on the table, out in 5 minutes. And she said, "Why are you so happy taking care of patients?" I said, "Well, because you get to see what they've been doing for a year," or this was a lot of GYN, or, what their life is about. And she said to me, "I really hope," she said, "that when I'm doing it as long as you, I still love it as much." And I said, "Well, I'm going to tell you, you're probably not, because you have," and she said, "Well, that's what they told me to do. Don't really talk to them." And it was just like, I thought that's a difference in nurse sort of attitude and like sort of how she, and PAs are wonderful, but that's what they told her to do. So she had done it. She had come right out of PA school and done it. But I thought, that would get tiring, I think, after decades of doing that, unless you really, you want to know what this woman's about, like what's her life about, and get as quick as you can in that time, but see what's going on with her. Catholic school girl, grew up in Dorchester. When I have a contract and it says your book will be due to me in 6 months, 10 hours a day, and I had that book in 6 months. And through my editor. And I type with one finger. I'm telling you, 10 hours a day of not speaking to people. Because it's just, now I know people can go past their contract date, but I could not do that. She's also a New York Times best-selling author herself, Gemma Halliday, and she's been great for me, a great publisher. It is different not having an agent, I will say. I have an agent, but not for these books. It is, I mean, she's wonderful, but the agent, my first agent was just really hands-on. So it's very different not having that. So what I always say is, and remember, I've always worked in tertiary centers, so I've never worked at anything else. But what I would always say is, first of all, let me just back this up. I mean, any woman can choose whatever they want. And of course, if they have a significant high risk, but it's funny, people used to call me at Mass General and say, "Well, I think I'm high risk because I have," I'm trying to think of something, like just say anemia. I say, you don't want to be high risk here, because high risk here means you have either a kidney transplant or a liver transplant or a major cardiac issue. Like high risk at Mass General is very different than high risk at someplace else. But say it's a typical woman who's pregnant. So what I would always say is, you choose whatever you want. Midwives often spend a little bit more time. Not that, physicians don't. We are we all have the same protocols. So at Mass General, or bring up any of those places, the same protocols. Like if you get checked for diabetes at the same time, if you're hypertensive, these things happen. Like there are things that we just do not deviate from. We don't do it differently. But we do try to offer very hands-on, you know, and for the birth, you would always be with the midwife who try, you know, who try to, I mean, it is very similar nowadays, but, you know, some people just like, I think, connecting with a woman and, you know, maybe different birth positions that we would try. And, you know, I think that's, you know, because there's a lot of, it's funny, when I started, there were mostly only male obstetricians, and now there's, I think there's very few. I mean, I think we probably had 40, and I think 2 were men. There's mostly all women. But just try to provide maybe a little different aspect. And we had a lot of female physicians who would say to the patients, you know, look, you're looks like you're totally normal, everything's great. If you want to, why don't you go see the midwives and give them a try? I mean, we give them, you know, we would still give epidurals, you know, it's not like we withhold pain medication. So the experience is similar, but maybe spend a little more time in visits because we could, and, you know, at the birth, maybe offer like, you know, perhaps little different alternatives. I laugh, I mean, I'm very lucky if I could get published, you know, really, I know I'm very lucky, and have a series. I never thought I would, so it's been great, I have to say. So, well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.